Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be diving into Phil Vischer and his handling of the Florida bill that's titled pejoratively the Don't Say Gay bill, which, I don't care about the name because the name is a pretty good name because I don't care about how the left responds to it because this bill is winning. And we're going to talk about how Phil Vischer is really obfuscating the issue of grooming children. And we're going to be diving into his podcast, The Holy Post, which is a podcast that he is a main member of, and how they have a panel discussion on this bill that is extremely charitable to the groomers and does not understand the core concepts that the bill employs. So we're going to talk about why Phil Vischer is wrong in this video. So don't forget to like the video. Also subscribe to the channel. That's the least you can do to support Christian content like this. So we're going to fire away. I believe this is at 1.25 speed.
Okay, there's a lot going on. Florida's Don't Say Gay bill, that's what it's called pejoratively.
1.5
Florida calls
speed.
it the Parental Rights and Education bill. It bans any instruction on gender and sexuality from grades up through grade 3.
So, can I read the actual line from the bill that's causing the problem?
Read the line from the bill.
This is a quote. Classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3 or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. So to break this down, basically you can't do anything about sexual orientation or gender for grades K through 3, but all the way through high school, you are not allowed to do any instruction on sexuality that's not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate.
Right.
But there's no definition given to what those things mean.
Okay, so let's start by putting it, because people are going to be on both sides of this one. Let's start by putting it in the most charitable terms, okay? And then...
Reminder, this channel is called The Holy Post. It is supposedly Christian content, and they think that Christians would naturally be on both sides of this. That's a ridiculous statement because this is such a no-brainer.
We'll put it in the least charitable terms, okay? So we'll look at both sides. I think the most charitable terms to put this in is the majority of Americans are part of a traditional faith background, a faith tradition. Most major faith traditions still have a traditional, biblical ethic of sexuality. Most parents that hold to a traditional sexual ethic, biblical sexual ethic, probably don't want their kindergartners being taught by their teacher that their parents' traditional sexual ethic is wrong. Okay, is that safe to say?
Yeah, I also think it's just safe to say most Americans don't want any of their kindergartners taught anything about sex by any teacher.
But that it could be as simple as, do the books that they're reading in kindergarten have only heterosexual couples in them, or only traditional families in them? Because this would probably ban books that have a same-sex family portrayed.
Yes, but what's interesting about the verbiage of this thing I just read is it could also be interpreted to ban any books with any couples at all. Even heterosexual couples, because all it says is sexual orientation. Heterosexuality is an orientation. So to show a married couple who are a man and a woman in a story could also technically be banned.
And which lawsuit do you think Lucian Greaves is going to file?
Yeah, we don't feel like, it's even where we...
So let's talk about a false premise that they say in a supposedly Christian channel is that homosexuality is an orientation. It's not. That is a very Freudian mentality. This concept of sexual orientation, very Freudian, and Al Mohler believes in it. It's not a biblical concept. It's not, because orientation basically means identity. So if you think that homosexuality is an orientation, then you're basically identifying someone at... It's basically a term of identity. Which is why, the whole... It's incompatible with the Christian view of human nature, or with humanity, I should say. So it's not a biblical concept, and they're using that term flippantly, which a lot of Christians do. It's unfortunate, but we need to kind of de-emasculate our language here, because it's not a orientation. It's debauchery. It is sodomy. It is a deliberate defiling of oneself.
Say we want prayer in schools, as long as it's our prayer.
Right.
We don't want sexual orientation talked about in schools at kindergarten unless it's our version.
Right.
Okay, so, but charitable reading, we think it's inappropriate that the teachers would teach our very young children about sexuality or gender in a way that goes against what we're trying to teach them.
Right. But interestingly, that's not what this says. all it says is sexual orientation or gender identity at all.
Yeah.
That means hypothetically, a teacher that says, hey, can we separate into boys and girls on one side of the room, boys on the other, could be a violation of this law.
No, it wouldn't.
Yeah.
Because you have to in some way
Yes.
instruct what's a boy and a girl.
The less charitable view is to point out the vagaries of the writing. For
There you
example,
go. Being less charitable, Sky.
yeah, the preamble to the bill doesn't say instruction; it says discussion. So it's actually internally inconsistent. So banning any discussion of sexual orientation or gender identity could be interpreted to mean that if a child from a same-sex household says, I have two moms, the teacher has to shut that down.
Right.
We cannot discuss that in here, which obviously would have an impact on that child.
Right.
To say your family is so shameful it cannot be even mentioned. And that's part of the distinction between is it the preamble that we're following or is it the actual bill? And why do they say two different things? And the recourse for all of this is that parents can sue the school district, which means school districts really don't want to have to spend millions of dollars in legal fees. So let's just try to avoid anything that could get. So the least charitable is this is about chilling conversation about any gender or sexuality issues in school.
So let's pause right here because the whole thing about it's enforced by parents suing. So this is called a private enforcement mechanism. This is the same concept that was implied in the Texas abortion bill. It is also the same concept that was being applied in an Idaho abortion bill, where you're privatizing citizens or deputizing citizens to use civil court to enforce the law. This is a based development in conservatism, that we are empowering our activist base, giving them the power via the law to enforce the law rather than relying on government agencies to do so. This is based. And therefore, there are straw man arguments about, this would ban theoretically heterosexual couples in books. No, it wouldn't. Because no parent is going to sue, except for maybe the gay ones. They might sue because they're, obsessed with grooming children. They might sue school systems about that, but the parents that are in support of this bill would not waste the money to sue, they would have the legal fees covered if they win. But if they lose, they don't. This would be a waste of money. And this burden, this both financial burden and, the whole legal burden of proof is a nice protective barrier to prevent fallacious or erroneous applications of this law. This law is self-enforcing because it deputizes citizens to enforce it. And the citizens would be on the hook financially if they maliciously apply this statute.
Making it worse, the bill doesn't only allow parents to sue the school, but forces the school to pay for the parents' legal fees.
Which is based.
So
yeah,
it is definitely meant to chill. In other words, the schools and teachers and administrators don't want to go anywhere near what could potentially trigger a lawsuit. So it chills. It freezes to absolute
adds,
zero. The issue.
It adds other.
So instead of defining terms, this bill relies on vagaries to allow the courts and civil magistrates to determine the issue. That is a good thing. That is a good thing because, this is all over the criminal law is basically full of examples of this, where there's a threshold for evidence. Well, what's the threshold for evidence? Well, let's look at you need probable cause. Well, what is probable cause? And we have a definition and a definition on top of that is established over time. But we rely on definitions to conduct investigations. We rely on definitions, vague definitions, because probable cause is a little bit vague. It is a little bit subjective. Reasonable suspicion, even more subjective than probable cause, which is why, it might vary from state to state. But when you have, developmentally appropriate, this is a standard. It might not be as cut and dry as probable cause, but it is a legal standard that this law applies that can then be interpreted by the courts. That is the duty of the court. If you look at the three branches of government, legislators make the law. Executive branch enforces the law. Judicial branch interprets the law. This law is not only self-enforcing because it deputizes the citizens to enforce it, which is based, by the way, it then allows the courts to interpret the law so that the law is not abused. This is separation of powers. This is a very limited government policy. Rather than creating a government agency to handle this, which could easily be corrupted, could easily be passed around by regime change or election. So this is a very good policy. Privatized enforcement mechanisms. Say it with me, because we should be doing that way more often. It empowers the base.
Things like schools would be required to notify parents when children receive mental, emotional, or physical health services at school. So if your child goes into, a counselor at school, a guidance counselor, and says, I'm really struggling with this, that counselor has an obligation to tell the parents, your child came in and this is what he said. That is obviously going to affect what kids are willing to say at school to a counselor or a teacher if, they're required to report it. And the fear is, obviously, that kids might be confessing that they're wrestling with their gender identity or sexual orientation, and maybe the guidance counselor is encouraging them to explore their, sexual orientation without telling the parents. We don't want that. But again, that's the charitable view. The less charitable view is we're going to shut down any honest and open conversation between troubled kids and school staff by sending the message to kids that you can't tell us anything your parents aren't going to find out about.
To also go down that charitable interpretation, Phil, I think as I was reading over stuff about this issue, I think it's a legitimate concern that a lot of families and communities have as we see this massive uptick in children who are questioning their sexual identity, questioning their gender identity, and the culture. I understand why a lot of people are anxious about this, and it's a legitimate concern to have. And I think it's also legitimate to say, as a parent, these are deeply formative, important issues that often intersect with values and religion and identity and faith. And I don't want school officials forming those values for my kids. I want to be responsible for that. I think that's all incredibly legitimate.
Right.
I'm pretty confident this bill is the wrong answer to a very legitimate concern. And it's a very poorly written law that can be so broadly misunderstood and applied. So for example, it says, you can only do this at any age. You can only teach these issues in an age appropriate way. Okay. Well, what might be age appropriate in Miami Beach could be very different than what they think is age appropriate in Jacksonville.
Right.
So
again, that's why you deputize the citizens to enforce the law via the courts, to interpret the law. That creates not only precedent, it also it also allows, more passionate issues. Like if you're having first graders do pronouns, you could tell the teacher their pronouns because that's a classroom activity. That could be sued, and then you could win that, especially if you rally enough parents to pool enough money to get good lawyers. This is it is very dependent on the ability to fund lawyers, and is very dependent on the ability to make a case. And this is not a case that would be made gratuitously, because the citizens would have to finance it.
And
It's so
parents are going to
vague.
think what is a parent may have a different idea of what age appropriate is as opposed to a school.
Right. We have some Amish parents in our school, and then we have some gay and lesbian parents in our school. I wonder what they think is age appropriate instruction.
Right. Well, and can I bring up one thing that I thought about? I mean, just to play devil's advocate a little bit. I mean,
Yes.
we've never traditionally, as far as I know, or I'm aware, and I could totally be wrong about this, but we've never really talked a lot about sexuality and, done, intricate health classes in K through 3 anyway.
Right.
That doesn't really start until 5th grade. I mean, I taught school for 10 years, and granted, it was in private school, but most other teachers I knew, they weren't even talking about that stuff until
Right.
middle school.
I think the issue isn't that third graders are going to be taught anything like sex ed. I think the problem is from kindergarten through third grade, as children are encountering just the curriculum and reading storybooks and things like that. If there are depictions of same-sex couples or transgender people or something like that, what you're effectively doing is normalizing those identities. And for some people, that's seen as offensive, and they don't want their kids to think that 2 men or 2 women married with children and having a family is okay.
Right. Well,
So that's what's being concerned with here.
The only thing that would compare to this, again, goes back to race, when you had people honestly arguing, in
Vischer
some parts of the
gone
South,
woke.
that my religion teaches the races must be kept separate. And now the government is wanting to put the races together. This is a huge impasse. And since then, we haven't, for most of American history,
what religion
Judeo-Christian
teaches
ethics have kind of informed public policy and public ethics. We're definitely at a crossroads where, Judeo-Christian ethics, if you hold to a traditional Judeo-Christian sexual ethic, you are out of step with public ethics. And how that plays out in public schools and in public settings is going to be increasingly contentious, and will lead more people to homeschooling and more people to private schools. And, if there's lawsuits flying around, more teachers to say, this isn't worth it, I'm out of here, harder to get teachers. I mean, it's hard enough to teach already, but now try to teach if you aren't sure whether you can acknowledge that Johnny has, 2 dads in the class when he brings it up. So this just, this is messy. It's going to get messier. And it's especially messy. You know who it's especially messy for? The Walt Disney Company. It's especially messy for the Walt Disney Company right now. They have a new CEO, Bob Chapek.
So let's just do a pause right here, because first of all, lady in the bottom left does not necessarily understand what the issue is or how it would be enforced, because the issue is not the curriculum. I see this, because again, I'm pretty on the pulse with the with what's going on in the school board in my own area, my own school board, and they recently passed a neutrality bill, or a neutrality policy, I should say. And, they were telling me, and it's a fairly conservative school board, that there is no critical race theory in the curriculum. The issue isn't that critical race theory is in the curriculum. The issue is that teachers are teaching it anyway when it's not in the curriculum. So when she talks about, oh, we don't talk about sex ed until 5th grade, because, that's when early sex education would begin, that's not the issue. The issue is, first of all, the books thing is one of the issues where you're, and you have a lot of shady books going around in school these days. That's one issue. But the other issue is teachers just offhand lecturing about this kind of stuff that's not in the curriculum, or having posters or whatever displayed in their classroom that is distracting to the curriculum or is purposefully indoctrinating. That's the issue. The issue is rogue teachers. Teachers with an agenda, a sexual grooming agenda. That is the issue here. The issue is not the curriculum per se. The issue is the teachers, the people who are implementing the curriculum, the people that are teaching the curriculum. Those are the issues. And again, the privatized enforcement mechanism would prevent frivolous lawsuits because they would be on the financial hook for it.
Is his name took over for Bob Iger, who was the most successful Disney CEO since Walt, and was beloved by all. Disney has a huge creative community internally, a huge LGBTQ community, and the fan base for the theme parks has a huge LGBTQ community. They do Pride Days every year. They have Pride Mickey Mouse merchandise now in the parks every year. So in general, the Disney company has been seen as an embracer of the LGBTQ community. Until this
just say
gay
homosexual
bill came out in
and
Florida,
transvestites.
and the Disney company said nothing about it, absolutely nothing, until employees started to go ballistic and staged walkouts at Disney parks saying we're not going to work because you're not saying anything about this. Pixar employees wrote a letter of protest, a public letter of protest, complaining that the parent company Disney had been editing out same-sex scenes, characters, interactions of the movies for years that Pixar writers had put in, and it exploded all over the new CEO, who just is like, what's happening? So he has had to, and it caused so much internal uproar, he has had to say, we are against this law. We will lobby. He had a call with the governor of Florida to express his concern. The governor of Florida then went public and called him woke, and Disney is a woke corporation that won't listen to the little people. So it's a big old mess. And Steve is walking into the room because he feels like he has a personal stake in this discussion. Steve does, right?
Yes, Steve
Right,
wants in on
Sky?
this for sure.
Yeah, and here's the latest. Disney just announced that they have an upcoming movie about Buzz Lightyear called Lightyear. It tells the story of the real Buzz Lightyear. Some friends of mine are working on it. They just announced that they had edited a same-sex kiss out of that movie, and they're now putting it back in. So this will be the first Disney animated movie with a same-sex kiss in it. And because it's now a public thing, this means everyone has time to get ready to protest.
With Disney, I think they're an interesting example because it reminds me a little bit of what's going on.
Yeah, I want to pause right here because Disney is definitely a company that's going through a creative bankruptcy period right now. And I would assume that Pixar, and the best days of Pixar are so long gone. So long gone. They are not putting out good movies. And Turn Red, which I'm probably going to watch here in a few days because it looks really terrible. It is one of the worst trailers I've ever seen for an animated movie. So, like, when was the last time Pixar came out like with a movie that made money? Because I'm not sure, because obviously with 2020 and all that, but I don't think Turning Red made money, and it certainly wasn't critically acclaimed. Certainly not as Encanto, which is the Disney movie that won the Best Animated Feature at the Oscars. So Disney movies aren't really as profitable as they used to be, is a long story short. And, there will be a go woke, go broke component to this. So it's just interesting to see Disney double down on what's not working for them, what's killing the MCU with expensive, very high budget movies. it'll be interesting to see, Lightyear, which sounds like a creatively bankrupt movie, just as creatively bankrupt as Toy Story 4. So, because Buzz Lightyear was meant to be a parody of Star Wars. It was a parody of that, so I don't understand how they're gonna, I don't know how you make that into a movie. That's just such a ridiculous concept. So anyway, that movie's not gonna do well, and it just shows how creatively bankrupt Disney is, that their writers are so obsessed with trying to groom children that they're not working on creating good stories, because let's be real, they're not creating good stories these days.
In some denominations and churches and Christian higher ed institutions, where Bob Chapek is caught between his employees, a lot of very creative pro-LGBT stuff, and his customers, who are probably skew far more conservative and traditional in their values. And likewise, there are Christian organizations that are caught between their students and some of their faculty, for example, and their donors. And one group is more progressive and one is more conservative. And when you're caught in the middle of that, you go, oh, okay, which constituency do I need to appease to cause the least amount of disruption to my business? And it may not be at all a depiction of the true values of a Bob Chapek or the board at Disney or any institution, as much as it is a desire to keep wanting to make a lot of money. And how do we upset the fewest number of people?
And the other issue Disney has is that if they put same-sex content in a movie, they can't sell it to Saudi Arabia. There are 5 or 6 different countries they can't sell it to. So they have to make an edited version and edit that stuff out. They can have issues in China, which is now the biggest movie market in the world. So he's caught between, I don't want to be Bob Chapek. He's caught between so many constituencies,
Right.
of, and it's not just we want things to be this way, we want things to be that way, but it's competing moral visions of the universe.
Right.
That what you are doing is immoral, and no, what you are doing is immoral, and I'm standing up for what's right. So if everyone is standing up for what's right, it's really hard to figure out how to compromise. If you compromise, and to a certain extent, I think the charitable view of the bill in Florida is to say, well, could we compromise where we just agree we're not going to have curriculum that deals with gender identity or sexuality, before 4th grade? You say that's a compromise because we live in a pluralistic society and we don't all agree on how to present gender or sexuality to 2nd graders. But if you believe that your side of that the other side is immoral, and that to compromise therefore is immoral, it's really hard to do that, and you just end up everyone pulling their kids out, in homeschooling because we can't agree.
I was wondering about.
So this is why we can't compromise on that issue, because the issue, as I said earlier, is not the curriculum. The issue is rogue teachers. If the bill says it can't be in the curriculum, that doesn't stop a rogue teacher from trying to groom children into being transvestites. That doesn't stop that. So that is an unacceptable compromise because it does not address the issue. Do not fall for that compromise.
About this when I read that article about the school, the Don't Say Gay bill, and thought, well, why can't they just treat this the way they do prayer or religion, where we just say, hey, this is not the domain of the public schools, and leave it to families and communities to do it on their own. The school shouldn't be involved. You can do that with something like religion and prayer. It's a lot harder to do that with
family
sexual
structure
identity and family structure. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because what happens when little Jimmy says, my 2 dads are coming to the Halloween, costume party thing at school, and you're like, well, we can't talk about that because it violates some policy. So there, and I fear what's going to happen here is similar to what happened with racial integration many generations ago, or back in the 1960s in the South, is a bunch of Christians decided we're not on board with this, and they're going to pull their kids out and create their, back then it was segregation academies, now it's going to be, I don't know, traditional marriage academies or something. And the side effect of that will be a whole nother generation of Christians will be withdrawn from the public square, ill-equipped to deal with how to live out their faith in a pluralistic society that doesn't entirely agree with them, and just cede more territory to forces and ideas and values that have no that aren't tethered to traditional Christian faith at all. And
so this is the argument he's making. He's making the argument that this bill hurts the Christian witness, despite the fact that this bill is overwhelmingly popular. Our culture is not overwhelmingly Christian whatsoever. Not even the Republican Party is overwhelmingly Christian. And yet, this bill has enough support that it advances our witness, because this bill, first of all, inflicts pain on school systems that don't curb their rogue teachers. Secondly, it's widely supported. This is a very popular bill. It doesn't matter what Disney says. It doesn't matter what the S&P 500 says. This is a very popular bill. It's a winning issue to say no grooming children. That is a winning issue. And he's trying to say that supporting this bill hurts our witness. It does not. It does not. You know who it hurts our witness with? The people that want to groom children for abuse. The people that want to chew children up in a movement, in a cult, and then spit them out when they're no longer useful for them. That's what this movement is. It's really a cult. It's not an orientation. It's a cult. You're groomed into it. And now they're going younger and younger because they cannot reproduce. So they have to recruit. And we don't talk about a lot of the sex abuse that leads to this brokenness, that leads to this sin and debauchery. You know, the whole mentality that hurt people. That's true with this. And then you have these NPCs that, you know, they just want to groom children. That's what they want to do because they have a reprobate mind. Romans 1, you know, they're in the third given over. They have the reprobate mind that says, I want to groom children. I want to dishonor my parents. I want to groom children into dangerous and harmful lifestyles. That's what this issue is. And he thinks this is a losing issue because Hollywood wouldn't like it, because Disney doesn't like it. No, this is a winning issue. It's an overwhelmingly winning issue. It's like not allowing men to compete in women's sports. This is an overwhelmingly winning issue. And to act like these winning issues hurt our witness, first of all, you don't understand the culture if you think that's the case. Second of all, you're trying to pander to pagans who are more hostile and hardened to the Lord, to the Bible, rather than, at the expense of. But I do want to be cautious about my words here because, God does the saving, not us. So we don't win, we're not supposed to be selling Jesus because you can't afford Jesus. Jesus paid the price for you. He redeemed you. And the implication in that text is that the purchaser paid, not you. So you were a slave to sin, but Jesus paid to redeem you. You did not pay to redeem yourself. So I just want to be clear about the gospel here. And in doing so, I lost my train of thought a little bit. But he's trying to. There are people. I believe that there are more people disgusted with the church that are on a conservative, or at least not as liberal as these Phil Vischer and this bald dude here, woke George Costanza. There are people that are to the right of those two. There's more people that are disgusted at the church for their effeminacy. They don't like all these hipster churches with the masculine women leading worship, and then the hipster skinny jean wearing dudes in the worship band and all that other stuff. They don't like that stuff. They don't like the pop psychology preaching and the people like Levi Lusko who clearly target women, white women, suburban women, the most pro-Biden demographic in the United States, suburban women. These pastors that continually target that demographic instead of preaching the word and, at the expense of appealing to men, because we've designed churches for women, suburban women, the most pro-Biden demographic in the country. There are more people that are disgusted with this effeminate church that we have in the United States that would be more receptive, I guess I should say, to the gospel message if we stopped being so effeminate in the church and we stopped giving so much credence to child groomers. Because we sound like we don't really believe what the Bible teaches when we talk and sound like Phil Vischer. When we talk and sound like this Sky dude, whose last name I forget. Or this woman who I think is a guest on their panel, or just a regular contributor, whose name I also don't know. There are more of those people that are disgusted with people like this than there are atheist, communist, that would be won over by a winsome tone. Because winsome is not winning. It's not winning. It's losing nicely.
I think that would be a terrible response. And it also wouldn't give Christians the opportunity to practice humility and graciousness and learning and a lot of the common grace that could come from remaining engaged with people who disagree with you.
Yeah, I think we do have to be able.
So you're supposed to let people groom your children, indoctrinate your children, just so you can appease this guy's perception of your Christian witness. Do not do that. You have a duty to God to guard your children, to protect your children, and to raise your children in the way that they should go, so that they do not wander. Pray on that promise. Execute that promise as though you expect God to reward your prayer. Faithfully execute that passage. Teach them the way that they should go. Do not let the school groom your children to stray. This is a terrible Christian witness. It's an effeminate Christian witness. And effeminacy turns so many people off. There's a reason why Joe Rogan's a popular dude, because he's not effeminate. He thinks marijuana is a food group, but at least he has balls.
To argue on some level that this is not exactly analog to the race debate of 50 years ago, because they're like the state of Mississippi would not air Sesame Street for the first year that it was on, and their response was the people of Mississippi are not ready to see black and white Americans living together on the same street,
or birds and monsters,
as they do on Sesame Street. And then, by the second year they decided, no, okay, we think maybe we're okay with it now, but if this is that, then it's, how can you stand against it? You have to say this is different because it is different. And that's all I have to say about that. Christian.
Really? That's all you have to say about that. You can say that they're different, but you can't articulate why they're different. Like, dressing up like a woman is a choice if you're a dude. Sticking your penis in a man's butt is a choice. Come on. There's no evidence that people are born gay. That the gene arguments have already been debunked by twin studies multiple times. It's a joke. They don't have a causal factor identified. It's just a cultural assumption at this point. It is a cultural assumption that people have widely adopted because it sounds nice to believe that, to support that view, even though there's not really science to back that view up. Especially when you look at the generational charts, where there's a recent study that said that like 20% of Gen Z, and that was a very small window of demographic. It was like 97 to 2003. 20% of that identified as a homosexual or transvestite or something else in that spectrum of debauchery. 20%. It's grooming. Grooming works. That's why these teachers are doing it, because it works. So it creates confusion in children. And it creates danger in their lifestyles to come. This isn't caring. They don't care about the children here. They care about how the world will think about them instead of how God will think about them. This is like the Southern Baptist Convention of 2021. The world is watching. That is their mantra. That is their mantra in their head. The world is watching.
I was going to say about Mississippi, you have to realize that the schools weren't actually integrated until I was in 8th grade. So that was like 1978 as it was. And I think, Sesame Street came out in the 60s. But one question that I had that's sort of intertwined with this issue is, the issues that we've been talking about bathroom use, male and female bathroom use, and sort of what those requirements are. And I started thinking about, what if there are teachers that in the Florida schools in the elementary level, or really anywhere, and they are homosexual, and they have a spouse of the same sex, then they're sort of forced into hiding, in a sense, based and probably living afraid that, what is this new world that I'm living in?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Go ahead, Sky.
This whole thing, though, fits this. We've talked about it over the years, but this larger dilemma that we increasingly live in a society where the most basic definitions are no longer shared, right? We don't share a common assumed definition of what marriage is. We don't even no longer assume a shared definition of what it means to be male and female. And that's what's different, I think, right now than during the civil rights movement. And honestly, I don't know how a pluralistic society like ours goes forward in relative harmony when we don't even share those basic ideals. That's what's a little bit frightening to me about this moment. You can't. No society can hold together without some shared ideals. And when the most basic ones are no longer shared, it's going to be very chaotic and and ugly, I think.
Yeah. And I hope we need to wrap up because we're out of time. We're over time. But I hope you can all understand that what we're not trying to do is say this is right and this is wrong, and you have to agree with us or you're wrong, because we're right. And rather say, let's look at what arguments people are making and what people are doing. And then let's look at, what's the most charitable way to look at this, and then what's a less charitable way to look at this, so we can try to understand both sides of these issues, because they're really, really tough and they're not going to get easier.
So again, just along those lines, that's what he says that he wanted to do, but he never talked about private enforcement mechanisms. He doesn't understand that concept. He doesn't articulate that concept. Why? Because he's not actually trying to be charitable. He's not actually trying to look at what the bill says, what the bill is designed to do. He's not looking at the issue. He's not listening to people. He's pontificating based off narrative and counter-narrative, perhaps. But he doesn't understand the issues at stake here. He doesn't understand what the origin of the issue is. It's not curriculum. It's teachers. And this bill is so self-enforcing. Not only does it require a private enforcement mechanism to enforce, but it also incentivizes school systems to crack down on this nonsense. And, a lot of things will be resolved before it makes it to court because of this bill. So this is a great bill. The church should be in full support of it. And I expect to see a Southern Baptist resolution in support of this bill and type of activity, because that's what we need. My name's Ray. This is the Evangelical Dark Web. We don't support grooming here, grooming children to be homosexuals or transvestites at Evangelical Dark Web. And so you should support that by subscribing, and also check out evangelicaldarkweb.org. We have an RSS feed that is great to subscribe to. And if you really want to support us, you can become a Patreon subscriber, not at Patreon, but at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join, because Patreon censors content like this content, where I talk about not wanting to groom children into sexual deviancy. So, with that said, have a blessed day. Let me know what you think about what I think, because I like the comment section a lot, and I will catch you on the next one.